Zeri's four hearts thundered in their chest as the sleek Vexari shuttle glided towards Earth's orbital diplomatic station. Through the view screen, the blue-green orb of humanity's homeworld loomed large, a sight that filled the young diplomat with equal parts wonder and terror. This was to be the first official contact between their species, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on Zeri like the gravity of a gas giant. "Steady yourself, junior diplomat," Ambassador Krull clicked, his mandibles twitching with what passed for amusement among their kind. "The humans may look strange, but they're not going to eat you." Zeri's skin flushed a deep purple with embarrassment. "Of course, Ambassador. I studied the briefings extensively. I'm prepared for any eventuality." Krull's compound eyes glittered. "Are you now? We shall see." As the shuttle approached the station, Zeri's confidence began to waver. The structure was immense, far larger than anything in the admittedly limited Vexari space fleet. Its sweeping arms and gleaming hull spoke of an engineering prowess that surpassed their own. But it wasn't until they cleared the final approach vector that Zeri's composure truly shattered. Surrounding the station was an armada of warships. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of vessels in tight formation, their designs varied but uniformly intimidating. Zeri had never seen such a concentration of military might, not even in historical records of the great Vexari-Zorn conflict. By the first egg, Zeri whispered, all four of their hearts beginning to race. "Ambassador, surely this can't be standard protocol." Krell leaned forward, his own posture stiffening. "Calm yourself, Zeri. This is unexpected, but not necessarily hostile. Remember your training." But Zeri couldn't tear their gaze from the view screen. Each new ship that came into view sent fresh waves of panic coursing through their system. The sheer scale of it all, the implicit threat, it was too much. Zeri's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Their exoskeleton began to vibrate uncontrollably, a Vexari stress response that only fueled their growing hysteria. I can't do this," Zeri choked out. "We're going to die here. They're going to kill us all." "Junior diplomat," Krell snapped, but his words were lost in the roaring tide of Zeri's panic. The young Vexari's legs gave out, sending them crashing to the shuttle floor. Their vision swam, dark spots dancing at the edges. They were vaguely aware of the crew rushing around them, of Krell barking orders, but it all seemed distant, unreal. As consciousness began to slip away, Zeri's last thought was of profound regret. They had failed their people before negotiations had even begun. Dr. Elena Chen's day had started normally enough. As the chief xenobiologist assigned to Earth's diplomatic corps, she'd been preparing for months for this moment. The arrival of the Vexari delegation was a milestone in human history, and she was determined to ensure it went smoothly. What she hadn't expected was to be sprinting through the station's corridors, medical kit in hand, responding to an emergency call from the docking bay. "What's the situation?" she demanded as she burst into the cavernous hangar. A crowd had already formed around the Vexari shuttle, a mix of security personnel and fellow diplomats. Captain Reeves, head of station security, turned to her with a grim expression. One of the Vexari delegates collapsed as they were disembarking. "Their ambassador is insisting it's a medical emergency, but we can't rule out the possibility of a trick or a trap." Alina's mind raced. "Let me through. If it is medical, every second counts." After a moment's hesitation, Reeves nodded, and the crowd parted. Alina approached the shuttle ramp, where she saw a cluster of Vexari huddled around a prone form. Their chitinous exoskeletons gleamed under the hangar lights, and their compound eyes darted nervously between their fallen comrade and the humans. One Vexari, distinguished by elaborate markings on its carapace, stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Krell," it clicked, its words translated by a small device at its throat. "Please, can you help Zari? I fear they have suffered some kind of attack." Elena nodded, kneeling beside the unconscious Vexari. Up close, she could see the rapid, shallow movements of its breathing apparatus and the unnatural pallor of its exoskeleton. "I'm Dr. Elena Chen," she said calmly. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me what happened?" As Krell quickly explained the events leading up to Zuri's collapse, Elena's skilled hands moved over the alien form, checking vital signs as best she could with her limited knowledge of Vexari physiology. Her mind whirred, correlating what she knew from briefings with what she was observing. "I think I know what's happening," she said after a moment. "Your junior diplomat appears to be suffering from a severe panic attack. The symptoms are remarkably similar to what we see in humans." Krell's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Can you treat this panic attack?" Elena nodded, already reaching for her medical kit. "I believe so, but I'll need your help. The medication I have might need to be adjusted for Vexari biology." What followed was a tense few minutes of careful calibration and administration. Elena worked with steady hands, acutely aware of the watching crowd and the potentially disastrous consequences if anything went wrong. But as the medication took effect, Zuri's breathing gradually steadied, and their color began to return to normal. Finally, the young diplomat's eyes fluttered open. They looked around in confusion, chittering softly. "Welcome back," Elena said with a smile. "How are you feeling?" Zuri's translator crackled to life. What happened? The ships, there were so many ships. Understanding dawned on Elena. She turned to Captain Reeves. "The fleet," she said quietly. "It must have overwhelmed them. We didn't consider how it might look to a less militaristic species." Reeves had the grace to look chagrined. "It was meant as an honor guard. A show of respect." "Perhaps," Elena replied. "We all have some cultural misunderstandings to work through." As Zuri was helped to their feet, supported by Krell and another Vexari, Elena caught the junior diplomat's multifaceted gaze. In those alien eyes, she saw a mixture of gratitude, embarrassment, and something else, a spark of curiosity, perhaps even the beginnings of trust. It wasn't the auspicious start to diplomatic relations that anyone had planned. But as Elena watched the Vexari delegation being escorted to their quarters, Zuri looking back over their shoulder at her, she couldn't help but feel that something important had transpired. A connection had been made, a bridge beginning to form between two vastly different species. The real work of diplomacy, Elena realized, was just beginning, and she had a feeling that she and Zuri would have significant roles to play in the days to come. Cultural clashes and conspiracies. Zuri's antennae twitched nervously as they stepped into the grand conference room of Earth's orbital diplomatic station. It had been 3 solar cycles since their embarrassing arrival, and though Dr. Chen had assured them that such reactions were understandable, Zuri couldn't shake the feeling of having failed before they'd even begun. "Remember," Ambassador Krell clicked softly, his mandibles barely moving. "Observe everything, but reveal nothing. The humans are cunning negotiators." Zuri nodded, their exoskeleton creaking slightly as they straightened their posture. The room was a marvel of human engineering, with sweeping views of Earth below and holographic displays shimmering in the air. But it was the humans themselves who held Zuri's attention. They were so soft. No protective carapace, no visible sensory apparatus beyond 2 forward-facing eyes. How had such seemingly vulnerable creatures built an interstellar civilization? And more pressingly, how was Zuri supposed to read their intentions without being able to interpret mandible positions or antenna angles? As the human delegation filed in, led by a tall figure with silver-streaked hair, Zuri found their gaze drawn to a familiar face. Dr. Elena Chen smiled warmly as she took her seat, and Zuri felt a flutter in their thorax that they couldn't quite explain. The lead human cleared his throat. "Welcome, honored delegates of Vexar. I am Ambassador Jonathan Drake. We are thrilled to begin these historic negotiations between our peoples." What followed was a dizzying array of presentations, proposals, and counter-proposals. Zuri did their best to keep up, making careful notes on their datapad. But as the hours wore on, they found themselves increasingly confused by the humans' communication style. Why did they bare their teeth so often? Was it a threat display? and their constant use of idioms. Let's table that for now. That's a tough nut to crack, left Zeri's translator struggling and their mind reeling. During a brief recess, Zeri found themselves alone with Dr. Chen near a refreshment station. The human was manipulating a device that produced a steaming dark liquid. "Would you like some coffee, Junior Diplomat Zari?" Elena asked, gesturing to the machine. Zeri's antennae flattened against their head. I'm not sure. Is it safe for Vexari consumption?" Elena's eyes widened. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have thought of that. Let me check our database." She tapped at her data pad for a moment. "It looks like caffeine isn't toxic to Vexari, but it might have some unusual effects on your nervous system. Perhaps we should stick to water for now." Zeri nodded gratefully, accepting a clear container of liquid. As they sipped, marveling at how the humans so casually ingested a substance that could alter neural function, Zeri found themselves studying Elena's face. "Dr. Chen," they began hesitantly, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course," Elena replied, her lips curving upward in what Zeri had learned was called a smile. "And please, call me Elena." "Elena," Zeri chittered, trying to mimic the soft sounds of human speech. "Why do humans show their teeth so often? In Vexari culture, it's considered quite aggressive." Elena laughed, a sound that sent an odd vibration through Zeri's thorax. "Oh, that's fascinating. For us, smiling, showing our teeth like this, is a sign of friendliness or happiness. It's meant to put others at ease." Zeri's compound eyes widened. "Truly? How curious. I've been interpreting it all wrong. No wonder I've been so on edge." As they continued to chat, Zeri found themselves relaxing for the first time since their arrival. Elena's patience in explaining human customs was matched only by her genuine interest in Vexari culture. It was refreshing. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp ping from Zeri's communicator. "A message from Ambassador Krell. My quarters. Immediately. Utmost discretion required." Zeri made their apologies to Elena and hurried through the station's corridors, their mind racing. What could be so urgent? They found Krell in his quarters, his exoskeleton gleaming with stress-induced secretions. "Junior Diplomat." He clicked rapidly. "We have a serious problem. I've uncovered evidence of a plot within our own delegation to sabotage these negotiations." Zeri's antennae went rigid with shock. Sabotage? But why? This alliance could bring unprecedented prosperity to Vexer. Krell's compound eyes darted nervously around the room. "Not everyone sees it that way. There are factions back home who fear human influence, who believe we should remain isolated. They've placed agents within our delegation to ensure these talks fail." As Krell outlined what he'd discovered, Zeri felt a growing sense of dread. The plot was intricate, involving carefully planted misinformation and staged cultural misunderstandings designed to erode trust between humans and Vexari. "What can we do?" Zeri asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Krell's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "We need allies among the humans, someone we can trust implicitly. Your friend, Dr. Chen. Do you believe she would help us?" Zeri's mind flashed to Elena's warm smile, her patient explanations. "Yes," they said with certainty. "I believe she would." "Good," Krell nodded, "because I fear we cannot handle this alone. The fate of our peoples may rest on our ability to unravel this conspiracy." As Zeri left Krell's quarters, their mind whirled with the enormity of what they'd learned. They had come to Earth as a junior diplomat, eager to learn. Now, they found themselves at the center of a plot that could shape the future of two civilizations. Making their way to Elena's office, Zeri steeled themselves for a difficult conversation. How does one explain to a member of another species that their new alien allies might not be as united as they appear? Zeri's hand hovered over the door chime. They thought of Elena's kindness, of the growing trust between them. Taking a deep breath, or the Vexari equivalent. Zeri pressed the chime. As the door slid open, Revealing Alina's surprised face, Zeri clicked softly. "Dr. Chen." "Alina, I need your help. It's a matter of utmost importance." Alina's expression grew serious as she ushered Zeri inside. "Of course, Zeri. What's wrong?" As the door closed behind them, Zeri began to explain, hoping against hope that the fragile bond between human and Vexari would be strong enough to weather the storm that was coming. Outside Alina's office, unnoticed by either of them, a shadow moved in the corridor. Someone had been listening, and now they slipped away, carrying with them information that could unravel everything before it had truly begun. The dance of diplomacy was about to become far more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The galactic stage, the vast amphitheater of the United Earth Diplomatic Station, hummed with tension. Representatives from a dozen human nations sat in tiered rows, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of data screens. Across the aisle, the Vexari delegation perched on specially designed seats, their compound eyes reflecting the stars visible through the massive viewport. At the center of it all stood Zeri, their exoskeleton polished to a high sheen for this momentous occasion. They fought to keep their antennae still, acutely aware of the importance of appearing calm and collected. "Esteemed colleagues," Ambassador Drake's voice rang out, silencing the murmurs. "Today, we take a historic step towards galactic cooperation. The draft treaty before you represents months of careful negotiation between humanity and our new Vexari friends." As Drake continued his speech, Zeri caught Alina's eye from where she sat with the scientific advisory team. She gave a subtle nod, a human gesture that Zeri had come to recognize as encouragement. They needed it. For the past weeks, Zeri and Alina had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, unraveling the threads of the conspiracy within the Vexari delegation. It had been a delicate dance of information gathering and careful confrontations. They'd managed to identify and isolate two of the saboteurs, but Zeri couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. Ambassador Krell stepped forward to address the assembly, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into smooth human speech. "On behalf of the Vexari Collective, I echo Ambassador Drake's sentiments. This treaty marks the beginning of a new era for both our species." As Krell spoke, Zeri's gaze drifted to the Earth hanging in the viewport. It was still strange to them, this world of vast oceans and swirling clouds, so different from the arid, rocky terrain of Vexar. Yet in the months since their arrival, Zeri had developed a fondness for the blue planet and its inhabitants. Their reverie was broken by a commotion at the entrance to the amphitheater. All eyes turned as a group of unfamiliar aliens strode in, their bipedal forms covered in iridescent scales. Ambassador Drake's composure slipped for just a moment. "What is the meaning of this?" One of the newcomers stepped forward, its voice a melodious trill. "Apologies for our unexpected arrival. I am Centenarchs of the Kral Imperium. We could not help but notice this gathering of potential allies and wish to participate." Murmurs rippled through the human and Vexari delegations. The Kral were known to both species, a powerful and enigmatic civilization that had thus far remained aloof from galactic politics. Zeri felt a wave of unease wash over them. This wasn't part of the plan. They glanced at Alina, seeing their own concern mirrored in her eyes. Ambassador Drake recovered quickly, his diplomatic training kicking in. "We welcome the Kral delegation, of course. Perhaps we could arrange a separate meeting to discuss your interests." Synarch's multifaceted eyes glittered. "Oh, but we are most interested in these proceedings. A human Vexari alliance could shift the balance of power in this sector quite significantly. Surely you wouldn't exclude us from such important discussions." As the human and Vexari leadership huddled in urgent consultation, Zeri felt a gentle tap on their shoulder. It was Alina, her face tight with worry. "This complicates things," she whispered. "The Kral are known for their cunning in negotiations, and their timing is suspicious." Zeri nodded, their antennae twitching nervously. Could they be connected to our conspiracy? Another layer we hadn't considered. Before Alina could respond, Ambassador Krell approached them. Junior Diplomat Zari, Dr. Chen. Your input would be valued in this discussion. As they joined the huddle of senior diplomats, Zari was struck by how quickly things had changed. Months ago, they had been a nervous newcomer, overwhelmed by their first contact with humans. Now they were being called upon to help navigate a complex diplomatic situation with galactic implications. The next few hours were a whirlwind of negotiations, proposals, and counter-proposals. The Krail, it seemed, were eager to insert themselves into every aspect of the budding human-Vexari alliance. We simply wish to ensure stability in the region, Orcs said smoothly. Perhaps a trilateral agreement would be more robust. Zari watched as Ambassador Drake's jaw tightened, a human sign of frustration they had learned to recognize. While we appreciate the Krall's interest, this treaty represents months of careful negotiation between our peoples. We cannot simply rewrite it on the spot. As the debate continued, Zari found their unique perspective becoming increasingly valuable. Their experience with both human and Vexari customs allowed them to bridge communication gaps, clarifying intentions and smoothing over misunderstandings. During a brief recess, Zari pulled Elena aside. Something about this feels wrong. They clicked softly. The Krall's arguments are too perfectly crafted to drive wedges between us and the humans. It's as if they knew exactly what points to press. Elena nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. You're right. It's almost as if... Wait. Her eyes widened. Zari, what if the conspiracy in your delegation isn't just about sabotaging the negotiations? What if it's about paving the way for Krall intervention? Zari's antennae went rigid with shock. By the first egg, that would explain so much. But how can we prove it? Their conversation was interrupted by the call to reconvene. As they took their seats, Zari's mind raced. They scanned the amphitheater, noting the positions of the known conspirators, the subtle interactions between certain Vexari and the Krall delegates. As Ambassador Drake began to speak, outlining a compromise proposal, Zari made a decision. They stood, drawing surprised looks from around the room. Esteemed colleagues, Zari began, their translator rendering their clicks into calm, measured tones. I believe I have a perspective that may be of value in these discussions. Ambassador Krell's eyes flashed with warning, but Zari pressed on. They began to speak of their experiences since arriving on the station, of the cultural misunderstandings, and the efforts to overcome them. They spoke of the strength that comes from diversity, and the dangers of allowing fear and mistrust to drive decisions. As Zari talked, they wove a careful narrative, dropping subtle hints about the conspiracy without directly exposing it. They saw understanding dawn in Elena's eyes, watched as some of the Vexari conspirators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. In conclusion, Zari said, their voice strong and clear, I believe that the path forward lies not in hastily expanded agreements, but in carefully nurturing the trust and understanding we have already built. Perhaps our Krall friends would benefit from observing this process, rather than immediately joining it. A moment of silence followed Zari's words. Then, to their amazement, Ambassador Drake began to applaud. The sound was quickly taken up by others in the human delegation. Even some of the Vexari, unused to the gesture, began to click their mandibles in approval. Sexenex's eyes narrowed, but the Krall delegate inclined its head in what might have been respect. An interesting perspective, young Vexari. Perhaps we have been too hasty in our approach. As Zari returned to their seat, they caught Elena's gaze. She was beaming, her smile wide and genuine. In that moment, Zari felt a surge of emotion they couldn't quite name. Pride, belonging, whatever it was, they knew that something fundamental had shifted. The negotiations were far from over, and the conspiracy still lurked in the shadows. But as discussions resumed with renewed focus and energy, Zari allowed themselves a moment of hope. They had found their voice on the galactic stage, and in doing so, might have just changed the course of interstellar history. The diplomatic dance continued, its rhythms more complex than ever. But Zeri no longer felt like a nervous wallflower. They were a full participant now, helping to choreograph the intricate steps that would shape the future of multiple civilizations. As the session stretched into the station's artificial night, the stars outside the viewport seemed to shine a little brighter. A new chapter in galactic relations was being written, and Zari, once the most junior of diplomats, was holding the pen. Crisis and cooperation. The klaxon's shrill wail cut through the peaceful hum of Earth's orbital diplomatic station, jolting Zeri from their rest cycle. Their antennae quivered as they quickly oriented themselves, years of diplomatic training kicking in despite the rude awakening. "Attention all personnel," a calm voice announced over the station's communication system. "This is not a drill. We have a Level 1 biohazard alert from the Joint Human Vexeri Research Station. All senior staff report to the Emergency Operations Center immediately." Zeri's hearts raced as they hurried to dress. A Level 1 biohazard. That was the highest possible threat level. Whatever was happening on the research station, it was serious. As they entered the operations center, Zeri was struck by the grim faces of both humans and Vexeri. Ambassador Drake stood at the center of the room, his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of hasty preparation. Beside him, Ambassador Krull's exoskeleton had taken on the dull sheen of extreme stress. "Ah, Junior Diplomat Zari," Drake nodded as they entered. "Good, we'll need your expertise here. Dr. Chen, please brief everyone on the situation." Elena stepped forward, her face pale but composed. "At 300 station time, we received an emergency transmission from the Harmony Research Station. They've experienced an outbreak of an unknown pathogen. Initial reports suggest it's affecting both humans and Vexeri." A wave of clicks and murmurs swept through the room. An interspecies pathogen was unprecedented and terrifying. Elena continued, "The station has been placed under quarantine, but—" She paused, swallowing hard. "We've lost contact with over 60% of the personnel on board. Those still responding report severe symptoms: fever, respiratory distress, and in Vexeri, a rapid breakdown of the exoskeleton." Zeri felt their legs grow weak. They'd known several of the Vexeri scientists assigned to Harmony. The thought of them suffering, possibly dying. "What are our options?" Ambassador Drake asked, his voice tight with concern. "We've assembled a joint emergency response team," Elena replied. "Top xenobiologists, virologists, and medical staff from both species. But given the unknown nature of the pathogen, sending them in is extremely risky." Ambassador Krull's mandibles clicked rapidly. "We cannot stand idle while our people suffer. Vexer is prepared to send our most advanced medical ship." "With all due respect, Ambassador," Elena interjected, "introducing more variables could worsen the situation. We need a small, specialized team that can work together seamlessly." Zeri found themselves speaking before they could second-guess the impulse. "I volunteer to join the response team." All eyes in the room turned to them. Ambassador Drake's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Junior Diplomat Zari, while your offer is commendable, this is well outside your area of expertise." "With respect, Ambassador," Zari clicked, trying to keep their antennae from betraying their nervousness, "I disagree. My experience bridging the cultural and biological gap between our species could be invaluable in this crisis. Moreover, I've worked closely with Dr. Chen. We have a rapport that could streamline the team's efforts." Elena nodded slowly. Zeri's right. In a situation this volatile, clear communication and trust will be crucial. After a moment of tense silence, Ambassador Krull spoke. "I support Junior Diplomat Zeri's inclusion in the team. They have proven themselves capable of handling unexpected situations." The unspoken reference to the conspiracy they'd helped uncover hung in the air. Ambassador Drake looked between Krell and Zeri, then nodded. "Very well. Dr. Chen, you'll lead the team. Prepare to depart in 2 hours." As the room bustled with activity, Zeri felt a hand on their shoulder. They turned to see Elena, her eyes filled with a mix of admiration and concern. "Are you sure about this, Zari? It's going to be dangerous." Zari's mandibles clicked softly. "I'm sure. Our peoples came together to explore the stars. Now we must come together to face this crisis." Elena smiled, a gesture Zari had come to find deeply reassuring. "Then let's go save some lives." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparations. Zari found themselves encased in a specially designed environment suit, its unfamiliar bulk a constant reminder of the danger they were facing. As their shuttle approached Harmony Station, Zari's first glimpse of it through the view screen sent a chill through their body. The once bustling research facility was ominously dark, rotating silently against the backdrop of stars. "Life support is still functioning," Elena reported from her console, "but internal sensors are offline in most sections. We're going in blind." The docking procedure seemed to take an eternity. Each clank and hiss as the airlocks engaged set Zuri's nerves on edge. Finally, the doors slid open, revealing the dimly lit interior of Harmony Station. "Remember," Elena said as they prepared to disembark, "we stay together. Our primary objective is to reach the main medical bay and secure samples of the pathogen. Secondary objective is to locate and assist any survivors." Zari nodded, gripping their medical scanner tightly. As they moved through the station's corridors, the eerie silence was broken only by the sound of their breathing and the soft whir of their suits' life support systems. The first body they encountered was human, slumped against a wall. Elena knelt to examine it, her movements clinical despite the horror of the situation. "Advanced stages of the infection," she murmured. "The cellular breakdown is like nothing I've ever seen." They found their first Vexari victim shortly after, the sight causing Zari's hearts to clench. The exoskeleton had partially dissolved, leaving the internal organs exposed. It was a death no Vexari would ever wish to experience. As they approached the medical bay, Zari's scanner began to beep insistently. "I'm picking up life signs," they clicked excitedly. "2 Vexari, 1 human. They're alive." They rushed forward, caution temporarily forgotten in their eagerness to find survivors. As the medical bay doors slid open, they were met with a scene of desperate activity. 2 Vexari scientists, their exoskeletons showing early signs of degradation, were hunched over a bank of computers. A human doctor lay on a nearby biobed, her breath coming in labored gasps. "Thank the stars," one of the Vexari chittered as they entered. "We thought we were the only ones left." As Elena rushed to the human doctor's side, Zuri approached the Vexari scientists. "I'm Junior Diplomat Zari. We're here to help. What have you discovered?" The lead scientist's mandibles clicked rapidly. "It's engineered. The pathogen. It's not natural." Zari felt their hearts skip a beat. "Engineered? By whom?" Before the scientist could answer, a violent tremor shook the station. Alarms blared as emergency lights bathed the room in a harsh red glow. "What was that?" Elena shouted over the noise. Zari rushed to a nearby console, their suits' interface allowing them to access the station's systems. What they saw made their blood run cold. "It's a ship," they clicked, their voice tight with disbelief. "It just decloaked off our port side. It's Kral." As if in response to Zuri's words, a new voice crackled over the station's comm system. The melodious tones were unmistakably Krell, but the words sent a chill through everyone in the room. "Harmony Station, this is the Kral vessel Silent Blade. Prepare to be boarded. Resist, and we will be forced to take extreme measures." Zuri and Elena exchanged looks of horror. The crisis had just become infinitely more complex. As the sound of distant explosions echoed through the station, they realized that their mission had changed. They weren't just fighting a deadly pathogen anymore. They were now caught in the middle of what could be the opening salvo of an interstellar war. Diplomatic gambit. The conference room aboard Earth's orbital diplomatic station buzzed with tension. Holographic displays flickered, showing the grim faces of leaders from a dozen human nations and Vexari hive clusters. At the center of it all stood Zeri, their exoskeleton still bearing faint marks from their harrowing escape from Harmony Station. And so, Zeri concluded, their translator rendering their clicks into steady, measured tones, we have irrefutable evidence that the pathogen was engineered by Krull scientists. Their attack on Harmony Station was an attempt to cover their tracks and acquire samples of the mutated virus. A wave of murmurs swept through the assembled dignitaries. Ambassador Drake stepped forward, his face etched with concern. If what you're saying is true, Junior Diplomat Zari, we're looking at an act of biological warfare on an unprecedented scale. Ambassador Krell's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. This is more than warfare. It's genocide. The pathogen was specifically designed to target both human and Vexari physiology. Elena, standing beside Zari, spoke up. Our analysis confirms it. The virus shows signs of extensive genetic manipulation. It's not just deadly. It's tailored to cause maximum suffering before death. The room erupted into chaos, accusations and demands for retribution flying. Zeri felt their antennae droop. This was exactly the kind of reaction the Krull must have hoped for. Fear, anger, a drive towards conflict. Please, Zeri clicked loudly, surprising even themselves with their volume. Esteemed colleagues, please, we must not let fear drive us to rash action. As the room quieted, Zeri felt the weight of every eye upon them. They took a deep breath, steadying their nerves. What the Krull have done is monstrous, Zeri continued. But responding with immediate violence will only lead to more suffering. We have an opportunity here, not just to prevent a war, but to reshape the very nature of galactic politics. Ambassador Drake's eyebrows rose. What exactly are you proposing, Junior Diplomat? Zeri's antennae quivered with nervous energy. A summit. Not just humans and Vexari, but representatives from every spacefaring race in the sector. We present our evidence, not as an accusation, but as a call to action. We show the galaxy that in the face of such a threat, we choose unity over division. A moment of stunned silence followed Zeri's words. Then, to their surprise, Ambassador Krull began to click his mandibles in the Vexari equivalent of applause. Audacious, Krull said, a note of pride in his voice. Risky, but potentially brilliant. Elena stepped forward, her eyes shining with excitement. It could work. A public forum would make it difficult for the Krull to deny their actions without losing face, and if we frame it as a collaborative effort to prevent future attacks. Ambassador Drake nodded slowly. We'd be setting a precedent for galactic cooperation. It's ambitious, certainly, but given the alternative. He turned to the holographic displays. Thoughts, colleagues? What followed was hours of intense debate. Zeri found themselves at the center of it all, fielding questions, addressing concerns, and slowly, painstakingly, building consensus. As the final votes were tallied, a sense of nervous excitement filled the room. The motion had passed. The Galactic Unity Summit would convene in one standard month. As the dignitaries filed out, making preparations to return to their respective worlds, Elena pulled Zari aside. That was incredible, she said, her smile wide. You've come so far from that nervous junior diplomat who nearly fainted at the sight of our ships. Zeri felt their exoskeleton warm with embarrassment. I had good teachers. They clicked softly. You, Ambassador Krull, even the conspirators in their own way. I've learned that true diplomacy isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about finding common ground in the midst of it. Elena's expression grew serious. You know the Krull won't take this lying down. They'll do everything they can to disrupt the summit. Zeri nodded, their antennae dipping slightly, which is why we have much work to do. The next 4 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Zeri found themselves at the heart of the most ambitious diplomatic endeavor in known galactic history. They worked tirelessly, coordinating with representatives from a dozen species, many of whom had never engaged in multilateral talks before. There were setbacks, of course. 2 days before the summit, A Vexari transport ship was attacked in neutral space. Evidence pointed to Kral involvement, but it was circumstantial, likely an attempt to inflame tensions. Through it all, Zeri leaned heavily on their growing circle of allies. Alina's scientific acumen proved invaluable in translating complex biological data into terms diplomats could understand. Ambassador Krell's centuries of experience helped navigate the treacherous waters of interspecies politics. Even Ambassador Drake, initially skeptical of Zeri's abilities, became a staunch supporter. His human talent for thinking outside established norms complemented Zeri's Vexari instinct for systematic approaches. Finally, the day of the summit arrived. The Grand Assembly Hall of Earth's orbital station had been expanded and modified to accommodate the diverse needs of the attending species. Atmosphere control boxes housed delegates who couldn't breathe standard air. Gravity plates were adjusted sector by sector to provide comfortable conditions for all. As Zeri stood at the podium, preparing to deliver the opening address, they felt a moment of vertigo. How had they come to this point? From a junior diplomat on their first off-world assignment to the architect of a new galactic order. They caught Alina's eye in the front row. She gave a subtle nod, a gesture of encouragement that transcended species. Zari's antennae straightened with renewed confidence. Esteemed delegates, Zari began, their words translated simultaneously into a dozen languages. We stand at a crossroads. The threat we face is not merely to one species or another, but to the very idea of a civilized galaxy. As Zeri spoke, weaving a vision of cooperation and shared prosperity, they saw something remarkable happening in the audience. Ancient enemies leaned together, whispering in hushed tones. Species that had never formally acknowledged each other were making eye contact, nodding in agreement. The path ahead will not be easy, Zeri continued. We have centuries of mistrust and misunderstanding to overcome. But I ask you all, if we cannot unite in the face of such a grave threat, what hope do any of us have for a peaceful future? Just as Zeri was building to their conclusion, a commotion erupted at the back of the hall. A group of Kral delegates, their scales shimmering with agitation, pushed their way forward. This is outrageous, the lead Kral shouted, his translator struggling to keep up with his rapid speech. These accusations are baseless. We will not stand by while our honor is impugned. Zeri felt a moment of panic. This could undo everything they'd worked for. But then, they remembered something Alina had told them during their cultural exchange sessions. Sometimes, the best defense is a good offense. Honored Kral delegates, Zeri clicked, their voice steady. We welcome your input. In fact, we would be most interested in hearing your explanation for the data we're about to present. With a nod to Alina, Zeri activated the holographic display. Detailed analyses of the pathogen's structure floated in the air, alongside records of Kral ship movements and communications intercepts. We are not here to accuse, Zeri said, noting with satisfaction the way the Kral delegates shifted uncomfortably. We are here to understand, to prevent, and yes, if necessary, to forgive. Will you join us in this endeavor? A hush fell over the assembly. The Kral delegates huddled together, chittering rapidly in their native tongue. Zeri held their breath, acutely aware that the next few moments could determine the course of galactic history. Finally, the lead Kral stepped forward. His posture had changed, the aggressive stance replaced by something almost contrite. Perhaps, he said slowly, we have been too hasty in our judgments. We would welcome the opportunity to address these concerns in detail. A ripple of surprised murmurs swept through the crowd. Zeri felt a surge of hope. It wasn't a full admission, not yet, but it was a start. Thank you, Zeri said, inclining their head respectfully. Now, let us begin the real work of building a safer galaxy for all. As the summit moved into its first session, Zeri stepped back from the podium, their legs wobbling slightly from the tension. They felt a hand on their shoulder and turned to see Alina, her eyes shining with pride. You did it, Zeri, she whispered. You actually did it. Zeri's mandibles clicked in a vexary smile. "We did it," they corrected. "All of us. Together." As they looked out over the assembled delegates, now engaged in earnest discussion, Zeri allowed themselves a moment of quiet satisfaction. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in galactic history, representatives of every known spacefaring race were sitting at the same table, united in a common purpose. The diplomatic dance had entered a new movement, its rhythm more complex, but also more harmonious than ever before. And Zeri, once the most junior of diplomats, found themselves leading the way into a new era of interstellar cooperation. A new galactic order. The Galactic Unity Summit had entered its final day. The Grand Assembly Hall, once a cacophony of diverse languages and conflicting ideologies, now hummed with a sense of cautious optimism. Zeri stood at the central podium, their exoskeleton gleaming under the soft lights, a stark contrast to the nervous junior diplomat who had first arrived on the station months ago. "Esteemed delegates," Zeri began, their translator rendering their clicks and whistles into a melody of unity in a dozen languages. "We stand at the threshold of a new era. These past weeks have tested us, challenged us, and ultimately united us." As Zeri spoke, their gaze swept across the room. They saw Ambassador Drake, his usually stern face softened with pride. Ambassador Krell's antennae quivered with what Zeri recognized as deep emotion. Elena sat with the scientific delegation, her eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. But it was the Krall delegation that held Zeri's attention. Gone was their initial hostility, replaced by a demeanor of grudging respect. The lead Krall delegate, Sexenerx, met Zeri's gaze with a slight incline of his head, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. "We came here facing the specter of war," Zeri continued, "a conflict born of fear, misunderstanding, and the actions of those who sought to divide us. But we chose a different path. We chose dialogue over destruction, understanding over accusation." Holographic displays flickered to life around the hall, showcasing the summit's achievements. A treaty outlawing biological weapons, signed by every attending species. Agreements on shared research into disease prevention and cure. Protocols for joint response to future pandemics or large-scale attacks. "These accords are more than words on a screen," Zeri clicked passionately. "They are a foundation upon which we can build a galactic community. A community where diversity is celebrated, where knowledge is shared, and where the suffering of one is the concern of all." As Zeri spoke, they felt a surge of emotion. This moment was the culmination of everything they had experienced since leaving Vexor. The terror of first contact, the confusion of cultural misunderstandings, the betrayal of the conspiracy, the horror of the engineered pathogen. All of it had led to this. "But our work is not done," Zeri cautioned. "These agreements are but the first steps on a long journey. We must remain vigilant, not just against external threats, but against our own prejudices and fears." Zeri's gaze fell on Sexenerx. The Krell delegate straightened, sensing the weight of the moment. "To that end," Zeri continued, "I propose the establishment of a permanent galactic council, not to govern or dictate, but to facilitate ongoing dialogue and cooperation. A neutral forum where disputes can be aired, where knowledge can be shared, and where we can continue the work we've begun here." A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembly. This proposal went beyond anything that had been officially discussed. Zeri felt a flutter of anxiety in their thorax. Had they overstepped? But then Ambassador Drake stood, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "Earth supports this proposal." Ambassador Krell was next, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "Vexor stands with Earth and junior diplomat Zeri." One by one, representatives from other species rose to voice their support. Zeri felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over them. But one voice remained silent. All eyes turned to the Krell delegation. Sexenerx stood slowly, his iridescent scales shimmering as he moved to the center of the room. "The Krell Imperium," he began, his melodious voice tinged with what might have been regret, has long stood apart from galactic affairs. We believed our strength lay in isolation, in the superiority of our culture and technology. Xenerx paused, his multifaceted eyes scanning the room. Recent events have shown us the folly of this belief. Our actions, born of fear and misguided ambition, nearly plunged this sector into chaos. A hush fell over the assembly. This was as close to an admission of guilt as anyone had expected from the proud Krull. We cannot undo the harm we have caused, Xenerx continued, but we can work to prevent such harm in the future. The Krell Imperium supports the creation of this galactic council. Moreover, we offer our most advanced medical research as a gesture of our commitment to this new era of cooperation. The room erupted in a cacophony of cheers, applause, and the varied sounds of approval from a dozen different species. Zeri felt their legs go weak with relief and joy. They had done it. Against all odds, they had helped forge a new path for the galaxy. As the formal proceedings concluded and the delegates began to mingle, Zeri found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of congratulations and expressions of gratitude. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Finally, they managed to break away, seeking a moment of quiet reflection. They found themselves by the grand viewport, gazing out at the stars. Earth hung below, a blue jewel against the vastness of space. Quite a view, isn't it? Alina's voice came from behind them. Zari turned to see her approaching, a warm smile on her face. It's beautiful, Zari clicked softly. I never imagined I'd see anything like this when I left Vexor. Elena laughed. I don't think any of us imagined we'd end up here when we first met. You've come a long way, Zeri. Zeri's antennae dipped in a gesture of humility. We've all come a long way. I couldn't have done any of this without you, without everyone who believed in the possibility of something better. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as shuttles began to depart the station, carrying delegates back to their home worlds. So, Elena said finally, what's next for the architect of galactic peace? Zeri chittered softly, a sound Elena had come to recognize as laughter. I'm not sure. I don't think I can go back to being a junior diplomat after all this. I should think not. A new voice interjected. They turned to see Ambassador Krull approaching, followed by Ambassador Drake. Junior diplomat, sorry, Krull began, his mandibles clicking formally. In recognition of your extraordinary service to Vexor and to the galaxy at large, it is my honor to offer you the position of Vexor's first representative to the Galactic Council. Zeri's compound eyes widened in shock. Ambassador, I'm honored, but surely there are others more qualified. Ambassador Drake stepped forward. If I may, there is no one more qualified. You've shown a unique ability to bridge the gaps between species, to find common ground where others see only conflict. The Council will need that in the days to come. Zeri felt overwhelmed. They looked to Elena, who nodded encouragingly. You've earned this, Zeri. The galaxy needs you. Taking a deep breath, Zeri straightened to their full height. I accept, they clicked firmly. I will serve to the best of my abilities. As congratulations were exchanged and plans began to form for the establishment of the Council, Zeri found their gaze drawn back to the viewport. Out there, beyond the station, beyond Earth, lay a galaxy of possibilities. Challenges, certainly, but also opportunities for growth, for discovery, for building something greater than any one species could achieve alone. The diplomatic dance would continue, its rhythms ever-changing, its steps growing ever more complex. But now, for the first time in galactic history, all species would dance together. Zeri felt a surge of excitement. Their journey had only just begun, and they couldn't wait to see where it would lead. As they turned back to their friends and colleagues, ready to take the first steps into this new era, Zeri knew one thing for certain. The future, vast and unknown as it was, looked brighter than ever before.